So how did they do it? How did this tiny little town on the Tiber River become, well, Rome, one of the biggest empires in all of history? It's a question people have been asking forever. And the answer? It's not some big secret. Turns out they had a system, a really powerful strategy they cooked up right from the get-go. So let's break down exactly how they pulled it off. I mean, it's the ultimate underdog story, right? But you gotta wonder, was it just fate? A lucky roll of the dice? Or was there something else going on here? That's really the big question we're gonna tackle. Just how does a single city-state even begin a journey that ends with it running a huge chunk of the known world? And here's the spoiler. It wasn't just luck. Not even close. It was a system. A repeatable, super effective system. They had this whole method for conquering and then consolidating their power that was just completely different from what any of their neighbors were even thinking about doing. All right, so where does this all kick off? Well, forget what you might be picturing, epic battles in faraway lands. No, no. It all started right in their own backyard. Seriously, the first steps toward empire were these small, local squabbles against towns that were, for all intents and purposes, their neighbors. In some cases, even their family. And you've got to remember, these weren't exactly foreign enemies. These were other Latin folks, people living just a few miles up the river. So Rome's first big expansion, it wasn't really a foreign war. It was more like a series of really intense family feuds, and Rome was dead set on winning every single one of them, swallowing up its rivals one by one. But out of all these little fights, there was one that was a huge deal. The showdown with Alba Longa. This wasn't just another town. Alba was like the spiritual capital for all the Latin people. So when Rome defeated them, and I mean utterly destroyed them, it wasn't just about grabbing more land. It was a statement. It was Rome grabbing the crown and declaring itself the new boss. Okay, and this right here, this gets us to the absolute core of Rome's early genius. See, it's not just that they were winning wars, it was how they won them. Their whole approach was, well, it was totally radical for the time, and it turned out to be the secret sauce for building power that actually lasted. So to really get it, let's look at two different ways of doing things back then. You had the Greek model, right? When they wanted to expand, they'd send some people off to start a totally new, independent city. It might be an ally, sure, but it was its own thing. And you know what happens with independent allies? Sooner or later, they can become rivals. Now, the Romans, they did the complete opposite. They didn't build new cities. They just made their city bigger. They didn't just conquer people, they sucked them right in. And they had a process for this. It was like a playbook. Step 1, beat the other guy in a fight. Pretty standard, right? Step 2, tear down their fortress. Makes sense. You don't want them getting any ideas later on. But step 3, this is the game changer. You take their entire population, everybody, even their gods, and you move them to Rome. And then step 4, their land, it's Roman land now. It's just absorbed. A total, complete takeover that turns a rival's strength into more power for Rome. And get this. Think about how wild this next part is. They didn't just take their regular folks. They took the conquered city's ruling class, their most powerful families. We're talking about clans like the Julii, the family that would eventually give us Julius Caesar, and they made them part of Rome's own elite. Your enemy's leader from last week could literally be a Roman senator next month. This was pure genius. It didn't just stop rebellions. It took the best and brightest of their enemies and made them part of the team. So remember Alba Longa? Wiping them off the map was the real turning point. With their main rival just gone, Rome basically stepped right into its shoes. It wasn't just the strongest city in the area anymore, it became the undisputed leader of the entire Latin League. They went from being just another conqueror to being the regional hegemon. And hegemony is the perfect word here, because this wasn't about Rome just ruling everyone with an iron fist. Not yet, anyway. It was more like being the top dog, the one with all the influence, over allies who were still technically independent. Rome was now the first among equals, but with a very heavy stress on first. This chart really breaks down how the whole deal worked, and you can see the power dynamic plain as day. Look at the military. The Latins supply half the army, but a Roman is always in charge. Period. What about the loot from a war? Sure, it gets shared equally, but guess who decides how to split it up? Yep, Rome. And here's the kicker, the political status. The Latins were a league, but Rome wasn't just a member. It stood outside the league as its separate superior leader. See how that works? Now, all this new power, this leadership over all of Latium, it had a huge effect back home. With all this new wealth and manpower pouring in, Rome couldn't just stay a bunch of villages on some hills. All that growth on the outside demanded a massive transformation on the inside. Rome had to start looking the part.
And that's such a key point, isn't it? Power can't just be some idea on paper. It needs a physical home. For Rome to really be the center of this new world it was building, it had to create a capital city that screamed dominance.
And wow, did they ever build one. The most obvious sign was the gigantic new Servian Wall. There's this quote from an ancient writer that really captures the feeling of awe it created, emerging as it were from the tomb to testify to the might of an epoch, whose buildings subsist imperishably in these walls of rock. I mean, you can just feel the power in that description, right? This wasn't just a wall for defense. It was a statement, wrapping around all 7 hills and showing off the new epic scale of Rome.
And inside those massive walls, they forged a real city. They drained the swamps and created the Forum, the beating heart of Roman public life. They built a new Senate house, a central temple for their sacred flame, a huge circus for chariot races. All the pieces of a great capital were being put into place. And they fortified the Capitolian Hill to be the city's ultimate stronghold. This was city planning with ambition. So let's wrap this all up. When you look at it, Rome's amazing early success wasn't some historical accident. It was the direct result of this powerful 2-part strategy that set the stage for everything that came after.
And that's really the key takeaway here. On one hand, you have this totally unique political move, absorption, turning enemies into citizens, constantly feeding new strength right back into Rome. And on the other hand, you have this massive construction project, building a capital city that was literally designed for dominance. These were the 2 pillars that held up Rome's rise to greatness. Which, it leaves us with one last really interesting question. Once they had this system down, this engine of military absorption and urban power, was the Roman Empire basically inevitable? It's something people still argue about. So what do you think?